Joe Goldberg killed at least 11 people. He stalked women across 3 cities, locked a man in a cage, and watched his own wife burn to death. And yet, when Netflix dropped season 2, viewers went online and called him boyfriend material. That's not a bug. That's the whole point. We are living through a quiet collapse in storytelling. The traditional hero, the moral anchor, the man with a code, the one who does the right thing is dying. And audiences are not mourning him, they are celebrating his funeral. Because somewhere between Tony Soprano, Walter White, and Joe Goldberg, something cracked in how we respond to fiction. We stopped wanting to be the hero. We started wanting to understand the monster. This video is about why that happened, why it matters, and most uncomfortably, what it says about us. So let's enjoy cinema.
And once I confirm it's really you.
Before we talk about Joe, before we talk about Ed Kemper, we need to understand the mechanics. Because neither you nor Mindhunter stumbled into your sympathy by accident. This is engineered. There are 3 tools that writers use to make you root for someone who should horrify you. The first is the internal monologue. You runs entirely in Joe's head. The entire show is a first-person voiceover. Joe explaining his actions, rationalizing his impulses, framing every murder as an act of love. You spend 5 seasons inside the killer's skull. By episode 3, his logic starts sounding almost reasonable. That's not a coincidence. That's the oldest trick in the book. Access equals empathy. You can't hate what you fully understand, because understanding requires adoption of perspective, and perspective requires at least partial identification. The second tool is contrast. Every monster needs a foil who is worse. In You, Joe's victims are frequently written as shallow, cruel, or selfish, not because they deserve to die, but because it makes Joel look like the lesser evil in any given scene. The show stacks the deck. Writers call this moral positioning. I call it audience manipulation disguised as character complexity. The third tool is competence. We are biologically wired to admire people who are good at things. Joe is methodical, intelligent, resourceful. He reads, he repairs rare books. He loves his children in his own broken way. Mindhunter does the same thing with real killers it profiles. Ed Kemper is articulate, insightful, almost professorial. BTK presents as a community man, a church president. The competence creates a gap between what we know intellectually and what we feel instinctively. That gap is where moral disorientation lives. These 3 tools stacked together are how prestige television gets you to root against your own values.
What are you doing here?
I told you I'd show up to give you what you deserve.
Let's sit with You for a moment, because it is probably the most sophisticated piece of villain protagonist television ever produced. Penn Badgley almost walked away from this role. He has said publicly that he feared the show would romanticize stalking, that audiences would do exactly what they ended up doing. The producers convinced him to stay by arguing that his discomfort with the character was precisely why he was the right person to play it. That detail alone tells you everything about the show's self-awareness. The genius of You is not that Joe is likable. It's that the show weaponizes the grammar of romance. The voiceover, the close third-person framing, the way episodes are structured around Joe's obsession, all of it borrows the language of a love story. You have seen 100 films where a man watches a woman, pursues her, removes obstacles between them, and gets the girl. You takes that exact grammar and maps it onto a serial killer. Same syntax, different meaning. The horror of the show is not what Joe does. It's that the show sounds like a romance even when it's describing a murder. Caroline Kepnes, who wrote the novels the show is based on, understood something most writers don't. Genre conventions carry emotional baggage. She took that baggage and pointed it at something toxic. What does it say that season 1 of You, where Joe literally builds a glass cage and imprisons a man, was received by a significant portion of its audience as a love story? What does it say that Penn Badgley had to spend years on social media arguing with fans who wanted him to date his victims? The show became a referendum on how thoroughly the language of romance had been stripped of its moral content. Joe Goldberg is what happens when you tell a love story in the voice of a predator and nobody notices the switch.
This is so embarrassing.
If You is a fiction that mimics reality, Mindhunter is the opposite, a show grounded in documented history that functions like pure mythology. David Fincher's series follows FBI agent Holden Ford and Bill Tench as they travel the country in the late 1970s, sitting across interview tables from real convicted serial killers to build the foundation of modern criminal profiling. The show is based on the memoir of actual FBI agent John Douglas. These conversations happened. These men existed. And here is the ugly truth. The killers are the most compelling characters on the screen. Ed Kemper, played by Cameron Britton, is one of the most unsettling performances in television history. He's a 6'9" man who murdered 10 people, including his own mother. In Mindhunter, he's funny, self-aware, intellectually generous, and absolutely magnetic. You look forward to his scenes. Fincher and screenwriter Joe Penhall know this, and they make no attempt to hide it. They lean into it. The show's central question, never stated outright, always present, is: does understanding evil require a form of identification with it? Holden Ford becomes so absorbed in the logic of killers that he starts losing himself. He begins to think like them. The show frames this as professional hazard, but it mirrors what the audience is doing in real time. The real Mindhunter breakthrough was not a procedural one. It was philosophical. Douglas and his colleagues discovered that serial killers follow patterns, and that those patterns emerge from childhood trauma, emotional logic, and a coherent internal narrative. The killers were not random. They had reasons, and reasons, as I said earlier, are the first step toward empathy. The show sits with that discomfort and refuses to resolve it. It never gives you permission to like Ed Kemper. It never tells you that Holden is right to find him fascinating. It just keeps putting you in the room with these men and watching what happens to you. What happens is that you get comfortable. That's the most frightening thing Mindhunter ever did.
Most of my life with a nice home, nice suburb. I had pets,
There is a reason we arrived here. It didn't happen overnight. The classical Hollywood hero operated on a moral contract with the audience. He represented something aspirational: courage, justice, sacrifice. And for decades that contract held because audiences were willing to project themselves onto virtue. They wanted to be the good guy. Something shifted in the mid-1990s. It's hard to pin it to a single moment, but The Sopranos, premiering in 1999, it's the agreed-upon fault line. Tony Soprano was the point at which prestige television decided that moral complexity was more interesting than moral clarity. And it was right. The Sopranos is better show than most procedural crime dramas precisely because Tony is a genuine contradiction, a man capable of tenderness and savagery in the same breath. But Tony opened the door, and what came through it was not always equally thoughtful. The anti-hero became a formula. Every cable drama needed its morally compromised white man. And somewhere in that proliferation, the actual hero, the character who tries to do right even when it costs them, became synonymous with naivete, with stupidity, with boring. We trained ourselves to read virtue as weakness. Now the pendulum has swung so far that a serial killer narrating his own murders in the voice of a romantic lead is considered prestige content, and it is. But we should be honest about the cost of that shift. The stories we consume shape how we understand the world. A generation raised on Joe Goldberg and Tony Soprano has a different moral grammar than one raised on Atticus Finch. Neither grammar is the whole truth, but we should know which one we are operating in.
Shoots people outside.
Here is the argument I've been building toward, and I'm going to say it plainly. We root for monsters not because we are broken, but because fiction is a safe container for our most dangerous impulses. The philosopher Aristotle called it catharsis, the emotional release that comes from experiencing, in fiction, what we suppress in life. We contain the rage, envy, the desire for control, and fantasy of consequence-free action. Joe Goldberg acts on all of it. Ed Kemper articulates the inner logic of it. The danger is not in the experience. The danger is in the confusion between container and content. When Penn Badgley has to get on Twitter and remind his fans that Joe is a murderer, the container has failed. When true crime podcasts treat real serial killers as celebrities, the distance has collapsed. You and Mindhunter are not irresponsible shows. Both are built with enormous craft and genuine moral intelligence. The discomfort they generate is intentional. It's the point. But they exist in a media ecosystem where that discomfort gets stripped away by fandom, by social media, by the flattering that happens when art becomes content. The question is not whether we should watch these shows. The question is whether we are watching them honestly. Whether we are sitting with what they ask us to feel and then asking ourselves why. Joe Goldberg is not boyfriend material. He is a mirror, and what you see in him is not the show's problem, it's yours. The hero didn't die because we ran out of good stories. He died because we start being willing to hold up that mirror and look. Until next time, take care and don't forget to enjoy cinema.